If you need to be called chosen one in order to stand up straight, this video is not for you. If you are looking for a message that makes you feel special, superior, or secretly important, you should leave now. I am not here to comfort you. I am not here to motivate you. And I am definitely not here to convince you that everything will be okay. Most people are addicted to reassurance. They want to be told they are doing great, that their pain has meaning, that someone is watching over them and keeping score. That is not what this is. I only speak to people who have already lost their illusions. People who no longer believe in easy answers. People who have been disappointed too many times to trust hope without structure. If you still believe that someone is coming to save you, you are not ready for this conversation. Because the truth is not gentle. The truth is that many people break and stay broken. Many people suffer and never turn that suffering into anything useful. Pain alone does not make you special. Endurance alone does not make you strong. What matters is what you did after the damage. I am talking to the ones who kept going without applause, the ones who learned to function while carrying weight nobody acknowledged, the ones who stopped explaining themselves because they realized most people don't listen. They compare. If that sentence made you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is usually the first sign that something real is happening. This is not a message for the curious. Curiosity is cheap. Anyone can be curious. This is for people who are tired of lying to themselves, people who no longer want inspiration, but orientation, people who are willing to hear something that does not flatter them. I will not promise you outcomes. I will not offer guarantees. I will not give you an identity to hide behind. What I will do is speak plainly. And here is the first thing you need to understand before we go any further. If you are still here after this point, it is not because you are chosen. It is because you are willing to carry weight without being seen. And that already puts you in a category most people will never enter. Let's establish something clearly before anything else gets distorted. You are not broken. You are not unstable. And you are not weak. If you were, you would not still be functioning. Most people misunderstand what strength actually looks like. They imagine strength as confidence, certainty, or visible momentum. But real strength often appears quiet, contained, and unremarkable from the outside. It shows up as endurance, as restraint, as the ability to continue operating even when internal systems are under strain. What you experienced was not minor. It was not imaginary, and it was not something that could be thought away with optimism. You didn't invent the betrayals. You didn't exaggerate the withdrawal of support. You didn't misinterpret the moments where people shifted, alliances dissolved, or doors closed without explanation. Those events happened, and they required adaptation. The mistake many people make is assuming that adaptation means weakness. It doesn't. Adaptation is a survival response under prolonged pressure. When environments become unpredictable or unsafe, the nervous system recalibrates. Attention sharpens. Trust narrows. Expression becomes measured. This is not pathology. This is conditioning. You learn to read rooms instead of dominating them. You learn to pause instead of reacting. You learned when silence was safer than honesty, and when honesty would cost too much. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. What you went through forced you to develop internal regulation earlier than most people ever have to. You had to manage emotional volatility without external support. You had to remain functional while carrying unresolved stress. You had to make decisions under pressure without reassurance. That is not fragility. That is load-bearing capacity. Here is the part that matters most. You did not collapse. You may have doubted yourself. You may have questioned your perception. You may have gone through periods of numbness, detachment, or exhaustion that made you wonder if something was wrong with you. But you did not abandon yourself. Many people do. They fracture. They externalize their pain. They turn bitterness into identity. They seek constant validation to stabilize what they never learned to hold internally. You didn't. You stayed contained. You carried weight privately. You continued to show up in your life even when motivation was gone and clarity was absent. You learned to regulate instead of explode, to observe instead of accuse, to wait instead of panic. That restraint is not accidental. It is evidence of structure. This is where popular narratives fail you. They tell you that suffering automatically makes someone special, wise, or enlightened. It doesn't. Suffering alone produces nothing but damage. What matters is what someone does after the damage. Pain can hollow a person out, or it can compact them. Most people don't realize the difference because both outcomes look similar on the surface. Both involve withdrawal. Both involve silence. Both involve change. But one is decay. The other is consolidation. You did not disappear into distraction. You did not dissolve into constant noise. You did not numb your instincts beyond recovery. Even when you questioned everything, there was a part of you that remained intact, observing, assessing, waiting. That part matters. It means your core didn't fragment under pressure. It reorganized. People who haven't carried this kind of weight often misread you. They think you are distant, guarded, or indifferent. What they don't see is the internal cost of remaining regulated when chaos would be easier. You learned control not because you wanted power, but because you needed stability. That distinction is important. You were not trying to become hardened. You were trying to survive without losing yourself. And despite the strain, you did. That tells me something objective, not symbolic, not spiritual. You have already been tested under conditions that break most people. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly. And you passed. Not because you felt strong, but because you remained operational when strength was unavailable. Whatever you are not fragile. That has already been proven. The question now is not whether you can endure. You already have. The real question is whether you understand what that endurance has prepared you for. And that is where most people stop. You won't. At this point, something important needs to be made clear. This is not a message for everyone. Not because others are inferior, but because most people are not willing to stay present when the conversation stops protecting their ego. I am not speaking to the endlessly curious. Curiosity is easy. It costs nothing. You can be curious and still avoid change your entire life. I am speaking to people who are tired of surface-level explanations. People who no longer want to be entertained by insight, but confronted by it. People who have already tried the common routes, positivity, distraction, motivation, and discovered that none of them hold under pressure. If you are still hoping this turns into something comforting, you will not enjoy what comes next. Most people want clarity without responsibility. They want to understand themselves without having to restructure their behavior. They want language that explains their pain, but they do not want standards that expose their patterns. This is where many listeners disengage, because selective pressure begins when the narrative stops offering relief and starts demanding honesty. You don't need another explanation for why things happen to you. You already have enough stories. What you need is the ability to sit with the implications of what those experiences require from you now. If you are here because you want to feel validated, you will eventually feel disappointed. Validation stabilizes briefly. It does not build capacity. This conversation is about capacity. It is about what happens when support is absent, outcomes are uncertain, and progress is invisible. Most people avoid those conditions. They look for frameworks that guarantee results or communities that reinforce comfort. That is not what this is. If you stay, you are agreeing, implicitly, to a higher level of personal accountability. Not because someone is watching, but because you are no longer willing to deceive yourself. And let me be precise here. This is not about believing anything. Belief is optional. Agreement is not required. Presence is. If you are still listening, it is likely because something in you recognizes that your life cannot be approached casually anymore. That the cost of drifting is now higher than the cost of discipline. That recognition doesn't make you special. It makes you exposed. Exposed to the fact that whatever comes next will demand more clarity, more restraint, and more consistency than you have ever been asked for before. This is the point where you decide whether you are here to observe or here to engage. Most people choose observation. If you choose engagement, understand this clearly. There will be no applause for it, and no one will remind you to keep going. If that causes resistance, you are still free to leave. But if you remain, do not expect comfort. Expect precision. Because from this point forward, the pressure is intentional. Now we reach the part most people quietly resist. Because everything up to this point can still be interpreted as encouragement, as resilience, as a story about strength. But what comes next removes that option. Here is the truth, stated plainly and without ceremony. If you continue forward in this direction, your life will not become easier. It will become heavier. Not in dramatic ways, not with constant crisis or visible struggle, but with a different kind of weight, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that settles into your daily decisions and never fully leaves. You will become more alone, not abandoned, but separated. As your tolerance for noise decreases, so will your tolerance for shallow connection. Conversations that once felt normal will start to feel inefficient. Relationships built on avoidance, distraction, or mutual denial will quietly dissolve. Not because you rejected them, because you outgrew the conditions they required. This is not loneliness in the conventional sense. It is structural isolation, the result of operating at a level of self-awareness that makes pretense difficult and compromise expensive. You will also be misunderstood more often, not because you are unclear, but because clarity threatens systems built on ambiguity. When you stop participating in confusion, people who depend on it feel exposed. They may call you cold. They may call you distant. They may say you've changed. They will be right. What they will not say is that your change removed the unspoken agreements that kept things comfortable for them. And there will be no reward for this, no recognition, no public acknowledgement, no moment where someone sits you down and explains that your restraint mattered. Most of what you will do correctly will go unnoticed. That is part of the burden. You will make decisions that protect long-term integrity at the expense of short-term relief. You will walk away from opportunities that would have given you validation but cost you coherence. You will choose restraint when reaction would have been easier and socially rewarded. And no one will clap for that. This is where most narratives collapse. They promise that growth leads to praise, that discipline leads to admiration, that doing the right thing eventually brings visible payoff. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. The real cost is internal. As you develop precision, you lose plausible deniability. You can no longer claim ignorance. You can no longer say you didn't know better. Awareness removes those exits. Once you see your patterns, you are responsible for them. Once you understand your limits, you are responsible for respecting them. Once you recognize what destabilizes you, you are responsible for refusing it, even when it is offered attractively. That responsibility does not feel empowering. It feels restrictive. Freedom in this context does not mean more options. It means fewer tolerable ones. You will notice this most in moments where it would be easy to compromise, to bend your standards slightly, to return to something familiar because it's available. And you will feel the cost of not doing that, because discipline does not feel noble in the moment. It feels lonely. It feels inconvenient. It feels like choosing the harder path without evidence that it will matter. This is where resentment can form if you are not careful. Not resentment toward others, but toward the process itself. The quiet question of whether the weight is worth carrying. Most people answer that question by putting the weight down. They soften their boundaries. They dilute their standards. They tell themselves that intensity was the problem. It wasn't. What was missing was patience. Burden framing is not about glorifying struggle. It is about being honest about the load, about understanding that there is no version of this path where responsibility decreases. It increases, but it also stabilizes. Over time, something subtle happens. The weight does not disappear, but it becomes distributed. Your system adapts. What once felt heavy becomes manageable, not because it is lighter, but because you are stronger in quieter ways. Not louder, not more confident, more consistent. You stop seeking permission. You stop waiting for confirmation. You stop needing external signals to justify your restraint. That is when the burden becomes part of your structure rather than something you carry. But make no mistake, this is not a reward. It is a trade. You exchange comfort for coherence, approval for alignment, ease for stability. If that sounds unappealing, that is not a flaw. It simply means this path is not yours, and there is no shame in that. But if you stay, understand this clearly. No one is coming to lighten the load. You will not be rescued from responsibility. What you gain is not relief, but clarity. And clarity is heavy. That is the cost, and it is non-negotiable. Below is a fresh, clean version of Part 5, Gatekeeping, written in English. 300 words, same function but not a repeat, with a colder, more decisive edge. This is where the conversation narrows, not because you are being tested, but because not everyone should continue. If you are listening with the expectation that this will eventually resolve into reassurance, this is where you stop. There is nothing further here that will make you feel safe, validated, or certain. From this point on, the discussion is no longer about understanding. It is about obligation. Understanding is easy. Responsibility is not. If you believe that insight alone changes behavior, you are still operating at the surface. Insight only creates pressure. What you do under that pressure is what defines you. So here is the condition, stated plainly. You do not get to proceed while outsourcing accountability. Not to fate, not to circumstance, not to the past. If you are still framing your life in terms of what happened to you, you are not ready for what comes next. Explanation has already served its purpose. From here forward, explanation becomes a hiding place. This path does not require belief. It requires compliance with your own standards. No one will supervise that compliance. No one will reward it. No one will intervene if you abandon it. That is the gate. You either accept that responsibility without resentment, or you step back. There is no halfway position that works. You cannot selectively apply discipline when it is convenient and ignore it when it costs too much. That inconsistency is exactly what this boundary is designed to expose. If you stay, understand the terms. You are agreeing to hold yourself to behavior you cannot justify emotionally every day. You are agreeing to act without clarity, without applause, and without proof that it will matter in the short term. If that feels excessive, it is. That is why most people don't continue. And that is fine. This is not a path that needs numbers. It needs alignment. If you cross this point, do it deliberately. If you don't, walk away cleanly. Both choices are valid, but only one is honest. This is the part most people never say out loud. Not because they don't know it, but because saying it costs them their audience. No one is chosen for free. There is no hidden exemption clause in life, no invisible authority keeping score and preparing a reward because you suffered more than others. Pain does not create entitlement. Survival does not generate credit. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling relief, not truth. The real distinction is not who was chosen. It is who was willing to pay a cost consistently, without negotiation. And the cost is not dramatic. It is not sacrifice in the heroic sense. It is not constant struggle or visible suffering. The real cost is long-term discipline in the absence of emotional payoff. Most people can endure pain for a short period. Very few can endure responsibility for a long one. Chosen, in any meaningful sense, does not mean protected. It means exposed. Exposed to higher consequences for lower standards. Exposed to the reality that once you see clearly, ignorance is no longer an option. This is where most narratives quietly stop. They tell you that awakening leads to ease, that awareness leads to flow, that alignment leads to effortlessness. Sometimes it does, for a moment. But what it reliably leads to is obligation. Once you understand your patterns, you are responsible for interrupting them. Once you understand your limits, you are responsible for enforcing them. Once you recognize what destabilizes you, you are responsible for refusing it, even when it feels familiar, even when it feels comforting. That responsibility does not feel spiritual. It feels inconvenient. You will have to do the right thing long after it stops feeling meaningful. You will have to maintain standards during periods where nothing seems to improve. You will have to act with integrity when cutting corners would solve the problem faster. This is the cost no one advertises. You don't get to outsource discipline to motivation. You don't get to rely on emotion to carry you through. You don't get to wait for certainty before acting. Consistency becomes non-negotiable. And here is the part that filters almost everyone out. There will be long stretches where nothing happens, no confirmation, no visible progress, no external feedback suggesting you are on the right path. You will not feel chosen during those periods. You will feel ordinary, overlooked, and sometimes foolish for continuing. This is where fantasy collapses. People who were only interested in identity leave here. They return to narratives that promise signs, synchronicities, or future vindication. They need reassurance that their patience will be noticed. But patience is not noticed. It is tested. The reality is that what you are building, if you are building anything at all, is internal. Structure, reliability, coherence. The ability to act the same way on good days and bad ones. That kind of construction is invisible. And because it is invisible, it offers no social reinforcement, no applause, no community validation unless you actively seek it. And seeking it usually compromises the very discipline you are trying to build. This is why so few people sustain this path, not because it is too painful, but because it is too quiet. There is nothing glamorous about keeping promises to yourself when no one knows you made them. There is nothing affirming about refusing shortcuts when the outcome would be the same in the short term. And yet, this is exactly where real differentiation happens. Not in moments of intensity, not in moments of clarity, but in repetition. Day after day of choosing coherence over convenience, of choosing restraint over reaction, of choosing long-term stability over short-term relief. This is not about becoming exceptional. It is about becoming reliable. Reliable to yourself. Reliable under pressure. Reliable when circumstances stop cooperating. That reliability changes what you can carry. Over time, you stop needing to be reminded who you are. You stop seeking language to explain your experience. You stop waiting for external permission to act with discipline, not because life gets easier, but because you get clearer. And clarity removes excuses. This is the part no one dares to say. If you are truly serious about this path, you will spend more time alone than celebrated. You will feel ahead of some people and behind others. You will question whether the weight you are carrying is necessary, and you will never be able to prove in the moment that it is. That is the price, not suffering, not sacrifice, but the willingness to live without guarantees while maintaining standards anyway. If you can accept that, not emotionally but behaviorally, then you don't need to be told you are chosen. Your actions already place you where very few people are willing to stand. And if you can't accept it, there is no shame in that. This path does not need followers. It needs people who can carry weight without asking for meaning first. That is what they never say. And that is why almost no one stays. This is where I stop speaking. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because anything more would turn this into guidance. And guidance is not what you need right now. I am not asking you to follow this channel. I am not asking you to agree with me. And I am not asking you to adopt a new identity. If you need permission to continue, you don't belong here. If you need reassurance to move forward, this will not help you. What you do next does not require belief. It requires consistency. The most important work will not happen while listening to this. It will happen in moments where no one is observing you, in decisions so small and unremarkable that they never feel connected to anything meaningful. That is where most people fail. Not in crisis, not in conflict, but in the quiet space where no one is counting. You will not be measured by intensity. You will not be judged by insight. You will not be remembered for understanding. You will be shaped by repetition, by what you do when motivation is absent, by what you refuse when compromise is available, by how you conduct yourself when no one benefits from your discipline except you. If you are waiting for certainty, you will wait forever. If you are waiting for confirmation, you will drift. If you are waiting for someone to tell you it matters, you will eventually stop. So here is the only question worth leaving you with. Do you have enough internal structure to not betray yourself when there is no immediate consequence for doing so? If the answer is yes, you don't need anything from me. If the answer is no, no amount of content will compensate for that. There is nothing to subscribe to, nothing to believe in, nothing to repeat. Only a standard you either maintain or you don't. What happens next is not decided by this video. It is decided the next time no one is watching.